Every time tomatoes go on sale, I always end up buying more than I need. But if you just leave them in the fridge, they turn soft, watery, and go bad really fast. I've made that mistake before and had to throw out a whole batch. Such a waste. After trying so many ways, I finally kept one simple sauce method that everyone who tries it ends up asking for. Hi everyone, I'm Mira. First, I start with about 10 tomatoes and 1 red bell pepper. When I make this sauce, I always try to pick tomatoes that feel firm, fresh, and heavy for their size. If they're already too soft or bruised, the sauce usually won't taste as clean and bright. I've made that mistake before, and the flavor was just not the same. Once I bring them home, I don't use them right away. I wash them carefully first. I fill a large bowl with water and add a little white vinegar, then let the tomatoes and bell pepper soak for about 10 minutes. It's a very simple step, but for me, it really matters. A lot of people skip this part, but I always do it. The skin of tomatoes can hold dust, residue, and all kinds of things you don't really want going into a sauce you plan to keep for a while. Since this recipe is something I like to store and use later, I want everything to start as clean as possible. After soaking, I rinse everything well under running water, then dry each tomato and the bell pepper completely with paper towels. I don't like leaving extra moisture on the surface because when you're making something meant to last, even a small detail like this makes me feel more at ease. This step may look small, but it's one of the reasons the sauce tastes fresher and keeps better. Before today, did you ever skip this step completely? Type 1 for yes, 0 for no. Once everything is clean and fully dry, I start prepping the vegetables. First, I work on the tomatoes. I cut each one in half, then remove the stem area at the top. I always cut that part off completely because it feels firmer, and it's also the part I never want in the sauce. After that, I cut the tomatoes into small, even pieces. I don't make them too big, because bigger pieces take longer to soften. But I also don't cut them too small. I just want them small enough to cook down easily and evenly. When the tomatoes are done, I move on to the bell pepper. I cut off the top, remove the stem and seeds, then check inside carefully. I like to make sure none of the seeds are left behind, because even a few can affect the texture and slightly change the taste. Then I remove the white membrane inside and cut the bell pepper into medium pieces. I always add 1 red bell pepper to this sauce because it gives the sauce a naturally sweeter taste and a deeper, richer color. It's a small addition, but it really makes the whole sauce feel more balanced. Once the tomatoes and bell pepper are cut, I place everything into a clean pot and give it a gentle stir. Then I cover the pot and let it cook over medium heat for about 10 minutes. I don't add water here because the tomatoes will release plenty of juice on their own as they heat up. After a few minutes, you'll start to see the tomatoes soften and the bell pepper relax a little too. This is exactly what we want. At this stage, I'm not trying to cook everything down too much. I just want the vegetables to become soft enough so they blend easily in the next step. I like keeping the heat at medium, so everything softens slowly and evenly without burning at the bottom. Once the lid comes off, you'll notice there's already a lot more liquid in the pot, and the mixture will look softer and looser than before. That's when I know it's ready. The vegetables are tender, the juices are out, and the base is set for blending. Once the tomatoes and bell pepper have softened, I turn off the heat and carefully transfer everything to the blender. I like to pour in all the juices too, because that's where a lot of the flavor is. At this point, everything is already soft, so blending doesn't take long. Then I blend until the mixture becomes completely smooth. I don't rush this step. I let the blender run a little longer so it can break down the skins and fibers as much as possible. The smoother the mixture is now, the better the final sauce will feel later. This step is what gives the sauce that rich, even texture. It already starts to look like a real tomato sauce here, just thinner. Once it's fully blended, the base is ready for the next step. Once the mixture is fully blended, I pour it through a fine mesh strainer. I don't skip this step because it makes a big difference in the final texture. At this point, The tomatoes and bell pepper are already broken down well, but there are still some seeds, bits of skin, and small fibers left in the mixture. I like to use a spoon to gently press everything through the strainer. This helps separate the smooth tomato liquid from anything that would make the sauce feel rougher later. It only takes a few extra minutes, but to me, this is what makes the sauce feel much cleaner and more finished. A lot of times, this is the step that gives it that smoother, more velvety texture people usually expect from store-bought sauce, but the flavor still tastes fresher and more homemade. That's exactly why I like doing it this way. Once I'm done, what's left is a smooth, silky tomato mixture with a much nicer consistency. It may still look a little thin right now, and that's completely normal. Once the sauce has been strained, I pour it back into a clean pot and place it on the stove over medium heat. At this point, the texture is very smooth, but it's still too thin. This is the step where the sauce slowly starts to change. I let it simmer gently and stir from time to time so nothing sticks to the bottom. I don't rush this part because the sauce needs time for the extra water to cook off naturally. As it simmers, the flavor starts to deepen, and the color becomes richer too. After a while, you'll notice that it no longer looks watery. It begins to thicken little by little, and that's exactly what we want. When I check the texture, I usually lift the spoon and watch how the sauce falls back down. If it runs off quickly, it still needs more time. But when it falls slowly, almost like soft ribbons, that's when I know it's ready. I keep stirring gently so it thickens evenly and doesn't burn around the edges. This part may take a little patience, but it's what gives the sauce that richer taste and fuller texture. Once it reaches that point, I turn off the heat and let it cool slightly. Now it finally looks like a real homemade tomato sauce, smooth, rich, and deeply red. Once the sauce has reached the thickness I want, I turn off the heat and let it cool down completely. I never rush this part. If the sauce is still warm when you transfer it, the extra heat and moisture can affect how well it keeps later. So I always give it a little time and let it cool naturally. While the sauce is cooling, I get the jars ready. I like using glass jars with tight-fitting lids, and I always make sure they are clean and completely dry before I fill them. For me, this is one of those small details that really matters when I want the sauce to last longer. Once the sauce has cooled, I spoon it into the jars and seal them tightly. I like storing it this way because it keeps everything neat, easy to use, and ready whenever I need it. Then I place the jars in the refrigerator. When stored this way, the sauce can last for many months while still keeping its rich color and deep flavor. That's exactly why I love doing this when tomatoes are cheap. I only need to make it once, and after that, I already have homemade tomato sauce ready in the fridge for so many meals. It saves time, helps me waste less, and makes everyday cooking feel much easier. Once the sauce is ready and stored in the fridge, using it later becomes the easiest part. This is exactly why I like making it ahead of time. On busy days, I can just open a jar and use only what I need, without having to start from scratch. I use this sauce in so many simple meals throughout the week. Sometimes I stir it into pasta for a quick dinner. Other times, I spread it on pizza, add it to soups or stews, or mix a spoonful into meat dishes when I want a deeper tomato flavor. It also works really well in shakshuka or homemade chili. What I like most is that it saves me time and makes everyday cooking feel easier. Instead of buying store-bought sauce or worrying about tomatoes going bad too quickly, I already have something homemade ready to go. For me, this is one of those small kitchen habits that makes a big difference. I prepare it once, store it well, and then I can use it in all kinds of meals whenever I need it. With this simple method, I only need to make it once and can use it for months, no waste, and so convenient. Since I started doing this, I rarely throw away tomatoes anymore. Depending on the day, I just use what I need. What about you? Would you try this in your kitchen? If you have your own way, I'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching.